Let the water do the work. Induced meandering, an evolved method for restoring incised channels. By Bill Zeedyk and Van Glothier. Second printing, revised February 2012. Let the water do the work. Induced meandering, an evolving method for restoring incised channels. Bill Zeedyk, Zeedyk Ecological Consulting, LLC, Sandia Park, New Mexico. Van Glothier, Stream Dynamics Incorporated, Silver City, New Mexico. Illustrations and design, Tamara E. Gadzia, Quivira Coalition, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Chapter 1. Introduction. The river has taught me to listen, and you will learn from it too. Hermann Hesse. Stable rivers and floodplains. Stable rivers and streams that wend their way across long-established valley bottoms tend to have functional floodplains. A floodplain is a naturally occurring streamside feature created by the river, where the river safely spills excess flow during flood events. Flooding of the river onto the floodplain serves to attenuate flows, dissipate energy, deposit sediments, especially nutrient-rich, fine-textured sediments, recharge the shallow alluvial water table, nurture streambank vegetation, create diverse habitats, and sustain communities of riparian-dependent plant and animal species, including humans. Floodplains are essential to the proper functioning of many, but not all, types of rivers. Floodplains are pressure relief valves, escape ramps for rivers swollen by rainfall or melting snows. By temporarily diverting floodwaters onto adjacent floodplains, rivers effectively reduce the erosion of their beds and banks that would otherwise result from concentrated high-velocity flows. The energy is spread broadly across vegetated sites, which can more effectively resist the erosive force. Without the relief afforded by floodplains, large flood flows would concentrate energy in the channel itself, causing increasing rates of bank and bed erosion with increasing discharge. A river without a floodplain is a river confined, a river whose vulnerability only multiplies with increasing discharge. Induced meandering. Induced meandering is at once a science, an art, and a philosophy of river restoration. It is a method of transforming incised channels by guiding the river's work. As a science, induced meandering relies on the disciplines of geology, hydrology, fluvial geomorphology, biology, and ecology for knowledge and guidance. As an art, it strives to assist the stream in its natural evolution, using the power of floods to shape the channel and banks over time. As a philosophy, induced meandering strives to understand the river's processes and immutable rules, and to be guided by the understanding that natural river forces are to be respected, never coerced. Induced meandering is evolving as a practical method of restoring straightened or incised stream channels occurring within alluvial valley bottoms, using structures such as baffles and weirs made of natural materials. Chapter 5. Not all channels are appropriate candidates for induced meandering, but the induced meandering philosophy of going with the flow and paying attention to long-term processes can provide a platform for all stream and wetland restoration projects. A river or stream that has carved a niche or path for itself through exposed bedrock, such as the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, is beyond the purview of this method. Induced meandering will only work if the channel has erodible banks. Likewise, streams cascading through narrow ravines or stepping through accumulated boulder fields are not stream types where energy is normally dissipated through meandering. In general, streams steeper than 4% dissipate energy through step pools or channel roughness. Streams in very small watersheds, less than a half square mile, where the expected flood energy is small relative to the energy required to erode the transport material from the banks, may not be suitable for induced meandering either. Finally, any river that has ready access to an adjoining floodplain and is seemingly at ease with its place on the valley floor is also not the focus of induced meandering unless a specific problem can be anticipated and corrected. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Induced meandering is one method among several for restoring sinuosity and floodplain access to straightened and incised river channels or downcut rivers that once had accessible floodplains based on the historical record and the characteristic features of their valleys. Another very successful restoration technique, when correctly applied, is natural channel design developed by Dr. Dave Rosgen of Colorado. Both techniques are based on using an apparently stable stream segment or reference reach as a template for restoration, and both require proper training to apply correctly. This book describes and then uses the Rosgen Stream Channel Classification System, a form and process-based classification system that includes descriptions of natural stream channel evolutionary sequences. This system fosters greater understanding of complex channel stability issues. By studying the degree of variance of any channel from its more stable form, we hope to gain insight about the varied causes of channel incision, and to describe improved land management practices and channel treatments that might lead to channel stability and floodplain creation. Many factors, including natural and unnatural disturbances, weather events, and environmental trends, can cause sudden and drastic downcutting. Induced meandering has been used on small first-order streams and all the way up to fifth-order streams in New Mexico, Arizona, and Mexico. Geomorphic data substantiating this method have been collected on project reaches of the Pueblo, Colorado Wash at the Hubble Trading Post near Ganado, Arizona, 9 years of data, and on the Galisteo River near Santa Fe, New Mexico, 6 years of data, and other areas. Again, the methods, treatments, and practices described here are not intended for application to apparently stable channels. Incised channels. An incised channel is defined as one where its bed has eroded to a depth such that the stream has lost access to its floodplain. Watson, 2002. An incised river spreads outward by eroding its banks, creating the space it needs to accommodate a floodplain. If a river has become incised, either from natural or unnatural causes, it will tend to evolve through a series of successional stages toward the long-term predictable form, equilibrium, reminiscent of the pre-disturbance channel type. Classic papers on river morphology demonstrate how a new channel will evolve towards stability at a lower base elevation as controlled by a lower nick point. For example, an erosion-resistant rock formation or other feature. Channel evolution tends to proceed sporadically in response to random or stochastic events and is subject to reversal, a stuttering process at best. The aim of induced meandering is to speed up the natural process of channel formation by removing some of the stochastic nature of the process. Causes of channel incision. What are the causes of channel incision? How and why do rivers lose access to their floodplains? What actions, events, or disturbances initiate, expedite, or accelerate the process of downcutting? Conversely, what sorts of actions can stop or even reverse downcutting, thereby permitting floodplain formation? Incised streams and gullies, both perennial and ephemeral, are common throughout dryland regions of the American Southwest and the world. To what extent is the occurrence of such channel incision related to human activity, and what portion is natural? Channel incision can be deliberate or inadvertent as the direct or indirect result of human activity. Direct causes of incision include deliberate channelization and straightening of stream channels for flood control, irrigation, agriculture, and urban development. Rivers are often straightened and deepened inadvertently due to encroachment by roads, railroads, and pipelines on floodplains. Brooker, 1985. Channel incision has occurred throughout the Southwest as the result of stream capture by low-standard two-track roads, livestock trails, and old wagon roads. Zeedyk, 2006. Incision can also occur indirectly as the result of deteriorating hydrological conditions in the watershed. As described by William Graff in Chapter 2 of Fluvial Processes in Dryland Rivers, channel erosion is obviously the result of the disruption of some previous state of near equilibrium by alterations in the amount or rate of delivery of water, sediment, or both to the channel system. Graff, 2002. If the hydrologic condition of the watershed deteriorates, the ability of soil to absorb precipitation through infiltration and percolation lessen, while runoff increases. Hydrologic condition can be impaired by soil compaction, a reduction in plant cover, humus, and organic matter, and the disruption of vegetation shoots and roots in the soil profile. Overgrazing by livestock, soil tillage, an imbalance in the fire cycle, and urban and ex-urban development can all lead to deteriorating watershed condition, resulting in accelerated runoff and increased discharge for the same magnitude of precipitation. Stable channels become overloaded and expand to accommodate increasing sediment and discharge. Depending on the microtypography of the site, the relative resistance of the channel bed and banks, as well as the sediment supply, a previously stable channel may incise by scouring its bed, enlarge by bilateral erosion of its banks, or rise and widen as it becomes choked with sediment. All of these may occur in the same place over time. Channels that initially deepen more readily than they widen will become isolated from their floodplains. When the floodplains are no longer within reach of normal high water, the channel has become incised. Water tables drop, and the capillary zone that sustains riparian plant growth disappears. Former floodplains become dry terraces, and plant communities shift from wetland or wetland edge species to upland species. Reasons for keeping a channel incised. While speeding up the channel evolutionary process of floodplain development might produce a wealth of ecological benefits in a wildland setting, keeping a river confined to an incised channel can also produce a contrasting set of economic advantages, albeit at the expense of the environment. Some economic advantages include mosquito and flood control, protection of urban or agricultural lands, irrigated fields, and infrastructure such as highways, roads, railroads, and bridges. Where necessary, an incised channel can be used to protect valuable infrastructure from flooding. There is also the real estate development potential of historic wetlands. Such considerations are important, yet the benefits of a meandering channel should not be dismissed out of hand in favor of the incised form, especially where the ecological or flood control values of a meandering channel are greater than, for example, the protection of a fence line. Historic impacts. Many southwestern rivers have been widely altered and have suffered devastating episodes of channel incision over the course of recent human history. i.e., since the arrival of Europeans and increasingly with recent development of southwestern lands and resources. Several widespread historic land uses have led to dramatic and long-lasting impacts. Stream capture by historic but long-abandoned wagon roads, stream capture by livestock trailing through wet meadows paralleling stream courses, river hijacking by irrigation ditches and diversion dams, floodplain encroachment and confinement by early railroads, especially logging railroads, and stream channel realignment and relocation by farmers determined to create larger and more manageable crop fields along river bottoms. Examples are almost too numerous to mention. For example, wagon roads turned into gullies are common on the Navajo Reservation. Gullies caused by cattle trailing are widespread. The now incised beds of the Rio San Pedro and the Rio San Miguel near Cuba, New Mexico, are the result of their courses being rerouted by now abandoned acequias, or irrigation ditches. Blue Water Creek near Thoreau, New Mexico, and Sealy Creek on the Valle Vidal are deeply incised due to encroachment by logging railroads. The dry Cimarron River near Folsom, New Mexico, the Sapello and Moro Rivers, also in New Mexico, and Nutrioso Creek near Springville, Arizona, are all deeply incised due to realignments to facilitate crop field development. Classic examples of channel incision resulting from agricultural, municipal, or industrial development include Spur Lake Basin, an extensive wetland near Luna, New Mexico that was drained for agriculture but soon deteriorated into a maze of deep, ever-expanding gullies. Santa Fe River, as far back as the 1830s, in order to facilitate real estate development along the Santa Fe River in Santa Fe, New Mexico, city fathers encouraged backfilling of the river's floodplain to contain floods and gravel mining to deepen the channel. The riverbed is now deeply incised for miles. Recently, the city embarked upon an ambitious program to re-meander the river, restore the riparian zone, ensure minimum flow release from city reservoirs, and build streamside biking and hiking trails for the enjoyment of its citizens. Opportunities for using induced meandering are limited to selected reaches where space is available for the river to meander. Due to existing infrastructure and ownership patterns, these opportunities are limited to public lands. Where infrastructure and private property values are at risk, traditional engineering treatments, such as hardened channels, are being utilized to meet planned objectives. As a result of these constraints, both induced meandering and traditional engineering are being used on this project. Walnut Creek Ranger Station. During the 1930s, in order to alleviate occasional flooding of the historic Walnut Creek Ranger Station on the Prescott National Forest near Prescott, Arizona, the U.S. Forest Service dynamited a tough quartzite dike to lower the riverbed. The next flood initiated a round of head cutting that unzipped the valley for miles upstream to a depth of 20 feet. With current knowledge and understanding of riparian area values, one wonders what the cost of relocating the ranger station to higher ground would have been at the time, compared with the ecological services lost from the destroyed riparian area. Big Bug Creek and Hopewell Basins. Because of the large amounts of silt that it adds to previously clear running streams and the amounts of vegetation removed, placer mining and hydraulic dredging, as widespread as the natural occurrence of gold itself, has devastated many miles of alluvial valleys throughout the Southwest, including places with intriguing names like Big Bug Creek in Arizona and Hopewell in New Mexico. The Galisteo Basin, south and east of Santa Fe, New Mexico, has suffered centuries of human impacts that have caused the main stem of Galisteo Creek and most of its tributaries to become deeply incised throughout the watershed. These impacts, beginning with vegetative type conversion from grassland to juniper pinyon woodland under the Pueblo cultures of the 13th century, overgrazing by cattle, sheep, and goats, with the advent of Spanish expeditions around 1540 CE, continue to this day. Initial impacts were followed by the loss of the beaver to the fur trade in the early 1800s and the coming of the Santa Fe Trail and its wagons, which caused deeply incised gullies to form. The Santa Fe Trail was protected by the U.S. cavalry at Fort Marcy with its thousands of horses that grazed the fertile wetlands. The trail was soon supplanted by the railroad, the course of which closely followed the river, even usurping the riverbed itself where needed. The presence of the railroad led to clear-cutting of mountain forests for railroad ties and timber, and the newly cleared forests were soon burned and severely grazed, further impacting watershed condition. But it was the railroad itself that probably caused the most severe incision of the river, culminating with the flood of 1926 when the bed dropped 10 to 15 feet over long distances. Today, severe head-cutting and down-cutting continue, much of it fed by a proliferation of roads as former ranch lands are being subdivided and developed for ex-urban ranchettes. A detailed account of the history of the Galisteo watershed can be found in Appendix A, The Galisteo Watershed, Centuries in the Making, by Jan Willem Janssens and Lucy Lippard. Acequias and irrigation diversions. An acequia, Arabic word for irrigation ditch, is an artificially constructed conveyance channel. Acequias are usually built parallel with the river, along the edge of the valley, where water can be diverted to irrigate crops and pastures on the river terrace. Photo 1-8. Acequias have been used prehistorically throughout Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. Many historical acequias have been in service since before the Mexican-American War of 1846 and are protected under the terms of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1848. Many acequias are lovingly maintained, often lined with towering old cottonwood trees and orchards, and the subject of traditional ceremonies for annual cleaning and blessing. Rivera, 1998. Acequias are the livelihood of many remote mountain communities. Unfortunately, not all acequias are well designed or properly maintained, especially where communities are dying or moving away from agriculture. Many have fallen into disrepair and have captured either the main stem of the river or intercepted tributary channels, often resulting in channel erosion with severe downcutting and gully proliferation. Some have carried the entire flow of the main river for so long that the natural riverbed is no longer recognized as such. Others are in earlier stages of incision and have yet to alter the drainage pattern in a significant way. Recommended actions for abandoned ditches. Where community bonds remain strong, proper maintenance and regular cleaning can keep ditches in stable condition. In some cases, ditches are converted to lined systems to conserve water. Modern diversion structures can be built to reduce maintenance costs. Where ditches have become obsolete or have been abandoned, several actions are recommended. Action 1. Return stream flow to the natural channel or riverbed by permanently blocking the ditch or removing the diversion structure. This might require some grooming of the natural channel to assure sufficient capacity. Action 2. Abandoned ditches need to be drained at frequent intervals to return captured flows to the natural landform. Abandoned ditches can continue to convey hillside runoff, diverting flows from one sub-watershed to another wherever the ditch has breached. This creates gullies that eventually drain to pre-existing natural channels, overloading them with excess runoff and causing accelerated erosion. In the meantime, hill slopes and small drainage ways downslope of the ditches are deprived of their fair share of runoff, and the vegetation suffers. Action 3. Where abandoned ditches have eroded too deeply to be breached or drained, it may be desirable to apply induced meandering or channel reconstruction methods to create a meandering channel with a new floodplain in order to avoid further incision. Present and continuing impacts. In the arid Southwest, water is a valuable natural resource commanding a very high price. Yet our attitude towards its use and distribution can be schizophrenic. Water is treated as both a precious commodity and a bothersome nuisance. Where water is needed for farming and ranching, municipal, industrial, or domestic purposes, it often becomes the substance of controversy. As Mark Twain once said, "In the West, whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting over." Impacts of urbanization. Where water is viewed as a nuisance, such as storm water runoff from a highway, subdivision, or shopping mall, the objective is to get rid of it cheaply, easily, and effectively, often without regard to the consequences. Concentrated flows of nuisance water from such areas can quickly overload the receiving stream, causing downcutting of its channel. The tendency to treat water as a nuisance at upscale subdivisions and ex-urban ranchettes is often exacerbated by the legal absurdities of our litigious society. Spilling water from one's yard, driveway, or parking area onto the neighbor's property can potentially lead to a costly lawsuit for the recovery of alleged damages. In order to protect themselves, a common practice for developers or homeowners is to lead nuisance runoff from the rooftop to the parking area, to the driveway, and finally to the public street. The municipality responsible for minimizing the cost of getting rid of runoff routes the water down the street to the first natural drainage. Hydrologic connectivity of flow from rooftop to arroyo is thus established. The resulting overload in the natural drainage soon results in a new round of downcutting and erosion. Effects are cumulative, with all landowners making their small contribution to the growing problem. During the summer monsoon season of 2006, Los Huertos Creek at Placitas, New Mexico, experienced 4 large storm events in less than 2 months' time. Roads, bridges, and culverts were washed away and replaced, only to be washed away again. Homeowners fronting Los Huertos Creek suffered property loss, a potentially dangerous gas pipeline was exposed, and the channel incised an average of 7 feet over many miles, with one exception. During the preceding 20 years, urban development had converted much of the watershed from native vegetation to roads, rooftops, and parking areas. While the frequency and intensity of the 2006 storms was severe, the pattern of the storm discharge was clearly related to the adverse effects on the hydrologic condition of the watershed caused by urban development, which expedited storm water routing. Long-term residents of the Las Placitas community are few. Some among them remember how Los Huertos Creek once appeared, with its cottonwood willow bosque, or riparian forest, and small perennial pools that were home to fish, frogs, and water striders. The question now before the community is whether or not to establish a flood-controlled district which would route all flows through concrete-lined drainage ditches, forever sacrificing Los Huertos Creek and its riparian forest in the process. Many communities have this difficult choice ahead of them. Some landowners are anxious to save what is left and protect their properties from the drying effects of further downcutting. Efforts are being made to stabilize the channel bed with weirs and natural-appearing grade control structures to increase channel length and sinuosity by reconnecting the existing channel with its abandoned reaches and by installing induced meandering treatments to preserve or expand meander bends. One incised reach, 1,400 feet long, which had been treated using the induced meandering method only 2 years prior to the destructive 2006 monsoon season, experienced significant widening and yet did not downcut. In other words, the flood-prone area of the creek was significantly increased by the force of the flood. The treatment worked. In the treated reach, the water table did not drop, and the area is naturally revegetating with willows, cottonwoods, and other woody riparian species along the newly formed banks. Unfortunately, in adjacent untreated reaches, the stream bed downcut as much as 7 feet. Transportation system impacts. Roads and railroads built over the last 125 years continue to impact drainages throughout the Southwest. Where roads and railroads cross drainages, streams are often channelized or narrowed to accommodate trestles and bridges. This leads to changes in flow patterns, which leads to loss of soil and the conversion of historic wetlands and floodplain plant communities to drier sites that support only relatively unproductive upland vegetation. For example, in the early 1900s, the El Paso and Northeastern Railroad, EP&N, built a line from Carrizozo to Corona, New Mexico, crossing many drainages. Where trestles were installed, sheet flow was channelized to move flows under the trestle, drying out slope wetlands upstream and downstream of the tracks. When Highway 54 was built in the 1930s parallel to the railroad, channels were further impacted by the installation of culverts or bridge crossings. These impacts have changed a braided distributary channel and slope wetland into an incised channel with concentrated flows replacing ephemeral wetlands with upland grasses. If the stream had been routed through multiple culverts passing under the railroad embankment rather than a single large underpass, channelization would have been avoided and productivity of the landscape maintained. To resolve the problem, the channel would need to be reconnected with its floodplain and sheet flow restored. Check dams would not solve the problem. They would only create new ones upon failure. Historic floodplain access would need to be restored, creating an environment where riparian vegetation could build new soil and hold moisture in place. The causes of channel incision are many, and the effects are widespread throughout the drylands of the American Southwest. The challenge facing restorationists seems overwhelming, yet an exciting rediscovery of ancient techniques and a new focus on stream restoration offers hope. Entering a modern era. Going back to the earlier discussion of the impacts resulting from urbanization, an alternative to the above scenario would be to require developers and landowners to retain storm runoff on the originating property until infiltration and percolation matched or exceeded the natural condition. This could be accomplished with water harvesting earthworks such as detention basins that incorporate vegetated infiltration zones. Establishing drainage easements and drainage ways across adjacent properties might serve to keep runoff within its originating basin, allowing more time for infiltration to occur and extending the lag time or travel time between rooftop and arroyo, thus reducing and delaying the flood crest as compared with routing the water along paved travelways. The argument against this alternative, of course, is that the cost of building homes would increase, thus imposing a hardship on potential buyers and reducing the breadth of the market. This argument is effectively dismantled by Brad Lancaster. We harvest stormwater runoff from streets into our landscapes. Streets then become passive irrigators of beautiful shade trees lining the streets and walkways. This inexpensive greenfrastructure reduces the need for conventional, costly, concrete-clad storm drains. Lancaster, 2006. Short-term cures, long-term consequences. Attempts at channel stabilization in incised systems, though well-intended, ignore the long-term natural processes governing stream channel evolution. The most commonly used short-term treatments are small check dams, mechanical stream bank armoring, and gully plugs. Most are destined to fail over the long term, often with unforeseen but disastrous consequences. Check dams and gabion baskets. Check dams are hand or machine-built structures, usually constructed of rocks, logs, concrete, wire, brush, or a combination of materials. They are meant to stop further erosion of the channel by catching sediment and raising the channel bed. Emphasis is on damming up the channel and checking or slowing stream velocity. A gabion basket is a popular type of check dam. Check dams have enjoyed great favor for many years among well-intentioned conservationists and are the solution of choice for many novices to the world of stream channel stabilization. For many years, the principal author advocated their use and oversaw construction in many situations. The charm of check dams is seductive, with the promise of instant gratification. Build a check dam today, go fishing tomorrow. The charm is even more infatuating when structures are built with gabion baskets. They look so rigid, so geometrical, so orderly, so impregnable, so professional. How could they possibly fail? What is likely to happen to a gabion basket during a very large flood? What if the galvanized wire is broken by stones or merely nicked so that it may begin to rust? The problem with the use of check dams, whether they be fashioned of piled stones, rolled earth, stacked logs, sandbags, tire bales, gabion baskets, or steel-reinforced concrete, is that they are structurally unreliable in both the short term and long term. As Dr. David Roskin puts it, a river does not want to be a lake. The rule applies whether the river be an arroyo, a gully, a mountain stream, or desert wash. As soon as it is built, many natural processes of hydrology, geomorphology, and ecology begin tearing down a check dam. A powerful and unrelenting force bent on destroying a check dam is the weight of stored water, potential energy, seeking to find its own level. Water pressure seeps, trickles, and eventually pours through any and all weak or vulnerable spots, or around or under the structure, turning tiny leaks into gaping wounds. Often, a wound spawns a head cut and creates a gully. Stored water behind a check dam is not inert. It is chemically active and powerful. It can sometimes leach and dissolve soluble compounds from the dam, the pond, and wetland area, flushing them downstream. Burrowing animals, such as beavers, muskrats, pocket gophers, and other rodents, create tunnels through earthen dams, creating leaks leading to eventual failure. Check dams have no place in induced meandering or natural channel design. Stream bank armoring. Mechanical stream bank armoring can take many forms, from old cars to simple riprap to wire-reinforced rock mattresses to concrete revetments. Armoring is intended to hold banks in place, control erosion, and speed the flow of water down the channel. The consequences of channel armoring are to prevent or delay development of a floodplain and to transfer stream energy downstream. Until the structure is removed by the creek, this treatment can increase downstream erosion and accelerate incision or bed scour. Channel armoring often fails over time. When galvanized wire becomes nicked in 1,000 places by abrasive gravel during a flood, the wire rusts and eventually releases stones to the creek. A better alternative is to use bioengineering with native vegetation, willows, and cottonwood plantings, which provide beautiful and self-repairing bank protection and a prettier picnic spot than rusty wire. Gully plugs. A gully plug or sediment trap is a small to medium-sized dam made of earth or other materials. Gully plugs are used to stop downcutting, impound water, contain sediments, and arrest head cutting. They are often built for livestock watering and wildlife habitat. In many situations, gully plugs intercept the bulk of a runoff event and tend to dry out the downstream channel while the impoundment fills with sediment over time. Beneficial consequences can be found in a few cases where seepage from the impoundment provides sufficient perennial flow to promote the growth of riparian species. Leaky dams are generally thought to be failures by their builders because the water is not effectively impounded. The unintended harmful effects of gully plugs are the loss of stream flow due to capture in the ponded area, loss of sediment needed for building new floodplains downstream from the plug, and infestation by noxious weeds or other undesirable plant species, livestock concentration, and the creation of mosquito and bullfrog habitat. Bullfrogs are non-native species that can cause local extinction of endangered native frogs, such as the leopard frog. Over the long run, most gully plugs tend to fill with sediment and then fail catastrophically, spilling the stored sediments back into the channel and sometimes creating an anthropogenic flood of much greater proportion than any natural flood for the watershed. In the case of the Tire Bell Gully plug in a tributary of the Rio Puerco, the failure scenario involves scattering hundreds of old tires for many miles downstream. The evolutionary process. Incised streams follow an evolutionary process of bank erosion and floodplain deposition that, over time, may lead them back to their pre-disturbance form. The process can be orderly, but it is usually chaotic and subject to stochastic events. A leaning tree, a slumping bank, a log jam, or an ice flow can divert river currents left or right, forming a sediment bar or eroding a bank that is now out of step with other channel developing patterns. Because time is of no consequence to a river, eventually, the channel will arrive at a predictable form as appropriate to its watershed, sediment load, and valley type. The goal of induced meandering is to read the agenda of the stream and to speed the process along by orchestrating the natural forces. Removing the randomness from channel evolutionary processes means enjoying the benefits of a stable river sooner than would occur naturally. A stream can take many forms, each suited to its flood characteristics, and each using its available energy to deal with the sediment load delivered to it by upstream reaches and tributaries. A stream is continually adjusting to accommodate change and performing in its own time and at its own speed. Where the stream has been turned into a sluiceway to achieve human purposes, there will be inevitable consequences according to natural laws, which may include bed and bank erosion or excessive sediment deposition and flooding. The beauty of a natural river is that while it is wholly effective over the long term in moving mountains toward the sea, it is seldom fully efficient in any given place or time. Reaches catch debris, plug up, widen or narrow, build shoals, riffles, runs, eddies, point bars, cutoff channels, mudflats, oxbow lakes, scour pools, and waterfalls. Hardly orderly, but productive and rich in diverse life forms. Many varied plant and animal habitats would not occur in the river at all were it not for such imperfections. Life goes with the flow, exploiting every niche and nuance of a river's morphology. Ecological benefits of induced meandering. Habitat diversity, comprised of many different micro and macro habitats, sustains life in all its many forms, including human life. Microhabitats are small places possessing unique characteristics that set them apart from their surroundings. They provide certain conditions that meet the very specific needs of dependent plant or animal species. Induced meandering, natural channel design, or appropriate bioengineering can provide the means and the opportunity to initiate and sustain a complex diversity of microhabitats. The various treatments employed in the practice of induced meandering set in motion forces that alter stream channels and in so doing create various types of microhabitats. Once established, such habitats evolve and change and recreate themselves over time through the synergistic interaction of geomorphic and ecological processes. Examples of microhabitats that have been widely observed in response to induced meandering projects and practices include the formation of new sand and gravel bars used by foraging ducks, sandpipers, and nesting killdeer at Baffles. At the same Baffles, the subsequent colonization of aquatic and riparian grasses and grass-like plants providing rich feeding areas for deer, elk, wild turkeys, muskrats, beavers, geese, ducks, and snipe. And later, expanding patches of willow and cottonwood, sustaining a variety of wildlife that utilize the trunk, branches, and crowns of trees. In the new alluvial deposits, a rising water table. While opposite the Baffles, first ephemeral and subsequently perennial pools form beneath undercut banks, meeting the needs of various fish, insect, and amphibian species. And at boulder weirs and crossveins, scour pools develop that sustain aquatic insects and other species through prolonged periods of low flow. There are those who believe that rivers in nature exist solely to do the bidding of humankind. Such bidding might be to lift and convey ships in commerce, irrigate fields and pastures, quench the thirst of burgeoning cities, transport human waste, route floodwaters, or turn electric turbines. Perhaps the ideal river for such purposes is deep and straight, with steep concrete banks, minimal obstructions, regulated flow, and neatly groomed riverside parks on high terraces beyond the reach of probable flooding. However, hardened stream banks and artificially maintained channels are not the only choice. Maintaining healthy rivers by applying the concepts of induced meandering and natural channel design is an achievable alternative to the engineered river. This alternative provides a natural succession of micro and macro habitats while at the same time routing floodwaters safely, transporting sediment smoothly, and storing drinking water in the valley alluvium where it is safe from evaporation or tampering, providing scenic riverside viewscapes and sustaining a wealth of other economic and social values.